Hello everybody, thank you for watching my little video. This is Vincent, or Teacher Vincent, as many of you know me as, or some of you just simply Teacher. For anyone who knows me or reads my Facebook comments and posts, you often hear me talking about political issues. Now, I promise you this is not going to be political. This is not what this is about. It's simply a response to something that is in the news right now. So today I'm just talking about a recent outcry with the new Star Trek series, Star Trek Discovery, that's coming out. And the issue is there are not just one, but two female captains that are going to be represented, at least in the beginning. And both women who are in charge are people of color. So one of the outcries that I heard was that the PC police have gotten their hands on Star Trek now, and Hollywood is making things too liberal. So again, this is not going to be a political rant. This is more of a response to that. So disclaimer, I'm not talking about racism here. This is not it. I'm not talking about subliminal nor outspoken racism. This is going to be addressing something that's obvious. Now, when it comes to Star Trek, there's a confession that I have that I don't really feel is confession. Although I'm very aware politically and I am unapologetically a fan of sports, 49ers, go. In Cleveland, I don't know what you're doing. I love the theater, cinema, and many other things I love to talk about. But deep down, well, actually not deep down, on the surface, I'm very much a big old nerd. Going from back when I was a little kid to present day. Video games and everything. Now, I never played Dungeons and Dragons. Well, I never got into Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not going to judge you if that's your thing, but I just don't find it entertaining to sit around a table and imagine things while probably the biggest asshole of the group is in charge of your entire adventure. So that's not me. But one of the nerdy things that I have been involved in since I was a kid is Star Trek. I am a great Star Trek fan. I've watched it since I was a kid. My father liked Star Trek and he passed it on to me. Deep Space Nine being my favorite, and you know, I'm actually happy that Star Trek is continuing today. So let it be known that I am a black nerd. I can deal with that. But let's talk about this outcry about the captains. Now, in my response, I'm going to point out some obvious things dealing with the racial dynamics. So all of this is about representation. That's what we're talking about today. Now, for this one, I'm going to ignore Star Trek the original series because that was in a different time in our society. It was during the 60s. There was a lot of things going on. They made some efforts to try to show how we could evolve and be more inclusive. But, I mean, come on. Their enemies, the Klingons, were basically just blackface. And on top of that, they made them not just blackface, but with some stereotypical Asian features. So they offended two races with one swoop. So let's just forget about that. Let's move forward to the other series. So starting with Star Trek The Next Generation, which is the first one that I grew up on, they started to be more evident in what I'm talking about now. Now, we're not going to be talking about the starship crew. The crew itself, over time, started to become more representative. I mean, you had, you know, people of color in different positions and female doctors, etc., etc. So that's a different topic that I'll talk a little bit about that later on, but for right now I want to talk about not the crew itself, but the other species they encounter. So, premise of Star Trek for the most part is they go out into the galaxy and find different planets, new species, etc., etc. Now, just about 95% of the time, every new species, every new group of people they discover, they turn out to be enemies. So I still hadn't figured out why the hell they don't just stay at home, because it seems like, every time you knock on somebody's door in your neighborhood, they try to kill you. But whatever. But let's talk about these actual species that they encounter. Now, if you look at Star Trek, the other species of humanoids that they discover, admittedly, most of them turn out to be bad guys anyway, but when you look at the ones who are very aggressive, that want to just, I'm going to take over your ship and destroy you from the beginning, these villainous species are often depicted as colored, whether it be, brown skin, gray skin, some green-blue combination, scales, ripples, whatever. Most of the time, you will discover that these aggressive species are represented by being colored individuals. And then the other species that are more pacifists or enlightened, even if they eventually turn out to be enemies, are represented by white actors who have just a fair amount of makeup or special effects done to them that basically portrayed as just white people. So the message seems to be that the more peaceful races outside of our planet are fair-skinned individuals, and the aggressive species and races are individuals who are represented by some type of color. Now, what that does, if you are someone who's impressionable, or maybe not even that young, you see this, and if you are a person of color like myself, you see yourself as being more a part of these aggressive races. And you see the peaceful, enlightened people as fair-skinned individuals. So as a kid, what you do is you go out into society and you see you are one of the aggressive people and you have to tone it down. And you see the whiter people as they are the ones who are civilized, who got their stuff together. So it's like we're almost doing some self-hatred just by comparing ourselves to what we see. And in the Star Trek universe, it's like all the societies are white dominant unless they're in a state of chaos. I mean, in actuality, that's how we actually represent our own world. If you watch TV or get on the internet or go to movies, it seems like our own world, Earth, is represented as being dominated by white people. I mean, this is what we see. This is how they show ourselves. And again, it's just not that way in reality. So you have to remember that, and I'm sorry to break this to you if this is brand new information for you, but as it turns out, white people are not the majority race on this planet. Now, if you look at Star Trek, it's not just this planet, but everywhere in the universe. White people are everywhere. But even here on Earth, in reality, this is not how it is. I mean, okay, so we know what we see on TV. But if you really look at a map, look at the globe, just actually look at the globe. You have, of course, the United States and Canada. You have Europe and Russia and all that, Australia. But look at Central America, the islands, South America, Africa, Asia. The two largest continents on the planet are not white dominant. They're just not. I mean, it's just not. There are people all over the world now with the transportation that we have. But we are not a white world. And if you really want to look at it, looking at the Science and Philosophy Forum, and you can check this yourselves, But when it comes to racial demographics, it appears that East Asians represent about 25% of the population, South Asian 21%. So that's a huge percentage. The next largest is indeed the white race, and they represent, according to this, 16%. Now, blacks represent 15%, because even though we are a supreme minority here in the United States, you have to remember that, we do have Africa. So, white people, European-based whites, are about 16% of the total population. And these demographics shift, but they didn't shift to about 80%, which is where we are in the Star Trek universe. So, that's the representation I'm talking about. So, with the villains, again, when you go out into space, this is what you see. You see white people as civilized and colored individuals, not necessarily associated with one race we find here on Earth, but people who are represented by colored skin. Those are the villainous people. Very aggressive. And let's carry this back over to the original point. The original point is people say the PC police are getting involved and, they're into Star Trek, and that's why they have 2 minority female captains. So let's point out some other facts. Let's go to the leadership in Star Trek. We're not going to talk about the whole crew. We're just going to talk about the leadership positions on the ship, not anyone in like Starfleet Academy back in San Francisco and anything like that. Just the people who are the focal points of the series. Now, we have the original series, and side note, before we forget, women. I'm talking about the racial things, but women represent about, let's just say it's 50-50 at this point, because the demographics have been shifting, and let's say it's about 50% women and 50% men on the planet. I mean, that's fair. So, onto the leadership in the actual starships. So we have the original series. You have Captain Kirk, of course, as the captain of the Enterprise, and his first officer, second in command, is Spock. I love me some Spock, but these are 2 white men in power. Then we go to the next generation. We have Captain Picard, and his first officer, William Riker. Again, 2 white men in charge of the ship. And then we move on to Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And now we start to see something a little different. In this one, we don't really have a true first officer. It's a station, and it's a complicated story, but it's understood that the second in command is basically Major Carrot, who is a woman, a white woman. And the captain of the station is Captain Benjamin Sisko, who is portrayed by Avery Brooks, a black man. And then we go to Star Trek Voyager, which was heralded as the most progressive Star Trek because they had a female captain. And this female captain, Janeway, is portrayed by a white actress. Her first officer is Commander Chakotay, who is a Hispanic man, Robert Beltran, that is portraying a Native American character. So, something different. And then we had Star Trek Enterprise, which is, different, but they didn't even want the Star Trek moniker at first, but whatever, we'll move on from that. Enterprise is commanded by Captain Jonathan Archer, played by Scott Bakula, who is again a white man, and admittedly, I'm not 100% sure about this because I didn't really watch the series, it wasn't my thing, but the first officer is either the white guy or the Vulcan woman, played by Jolene Blalock, and both of them are white. So, of the 10 people in command, 10, one of them is a black man, one of them is a Native American Hispanic man. So that means 8 out of 10 are represented as white people. 8 out of 10. That's 80%. Now, I just talked about how the world racial dynamics break down, whereas 16% give or take a few, is European descent. But here we have 80%. And this Starfleet, these captains don't represent the United States. This is supposed to represent Earth. All of Earth. So now let's go to the new Star Trek Discovery, and they are injecting 2 female captains, or at least in the beginning. One of them probably was going to get killed off or something. But either way, you have one who is of Asian descent, played by Michelle Yeoh, and her first officer, who's going to become a captain, is black. So if you throw those into the mix, now we don't have 10, but we have 12 commanding officers. And it's now, instead of 8 out of 10, it's 8 out of 12. For those of you who don't know how to calculate that, or just a little slow in math, that's 67%. 67%. So instead of 80%, it's now 67%. And that's not anywhere close to what's represented in reality. So, to those of you who are upset about 2 minority captains, and you can't even really call the Asian captain minority. I mean, Asians are not minorities on the planet. They might be minorities in the U.S., but again, they represent the biggest percentage of the population on the planet. So throwing these 2 in here, if you're really upset, I mean, think about it. Okay, so the white race on this planet does seem to have a lot of economic power. Now, no white person who is born should be apologetic or feel guilty about being born white or living as a white person. There's nothing to apologize for. And you shouldn't even regret seeing yourself represented on TV. The only thing is, we ask you to understand that that's something that we really don't have that much of. I remember when I was at work, my boss had a suggestion to get the teachers to form some camaraderie, and we were going to do these different activities. And one of them was you get in a group, and then she asked the question, all right, so think of an actor who would play you in a movie and tell it to your group mates. And of course, my group was composed of all white except for myself, and they had all these different actresses to choose from, and I was like, well, who do you want? Do you want Will Smith or do you want Denzel Washington? Because those are basically the only 2 black actors that they would even know. There are others, but I mean, can you really name them? Like if I told them Michael B. Jordan, don't laugh at me, and they were like, who's that? Go figure. So we don't have that representation. If you're a little boy or a little girl and you're watching something like Star Trek and you want to imagine, you can't really imagine yourself as the captain of the ship, because everybody wants to be the captain when you're a little kid. When you're an adult, you realize there's a lot of responsibility and like, forget that. But as a kid, everybody wants to be the captain, and we can't imagine ourselves as captain. We have to imagine ourselves, oh, I'm Captain Kirk. I have to imagine myself as another person who looks and sounds nothing like me, or any member of my family. And Star Trek is supposed to be an Earth utopia. Now, they're still fighting outside the planet, and everybody has all kind of problems, but in Earth is supposed to be a utopian society. So, is this really how it's supposed to be represented? In the command structure, 80 or 67%. I mean, 80% is basically the oceans, like the water that covers the earth. So from this, we're supposed to take that if we look at the earth, that's how many white people. Like the oceans is white people, and everybody else is the land. is that accurate? So if you are upset that they have two colored individuals as captains, you are still missing a very large point. The bigger point is, even with these, it still is way, way off of what we really see on our planet. Not in the US, not in the UK, not in France, on the planet. And that's just the racial stuff. If you want to get into the women, again, of the 12 people in command that I named, you have just 4 women. So that's, again, 8 out of 12 are men. And hey, I said women and men are basically 50%. 67% is not close to 50%. So it's totally off in every which way. When we talk about the racial dynamics, I already said Asians are not really a minority on the planet, but there's only one out of 12 that's being represented. One Hispanic, who's actually portraying a Native American, and 2 people of African descent, and that is it. So you can forget about anything like Eskimo or some type of Southeast Asian or Central America, not Central America, Middle Eastern. Forget about it. So my point is this: is this really something to bitch about? Is it really? Think about it. And have a good day.